Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that brief break for those 15 minutes. You got up, you got to stretch, grab a cup of coffee, and anything else that you might have needed. We're very excited to have this guest speaker back again today, Jim Yockey, who's the firm director of Energy and Infrastructure Group for Baker Tilly. There he is on the screen. Go ahead and wave, Jim. There you go. All right. And Jim's going to be discussing today tips when applying to DOE grants and jumpstarting your environmental project. But let me go ahead and introduce him again. Before we get started, for those participants who haven't or didn't get the chance to sit in yesterday's presentation. So Jim Yockey is a senior manager and tribal practice thought leader for Baker Tilly US LLP, and he has been with Baker Tilly since 2015. Mr. Yockey has broad experience in the energy industry, fossil and renewable, and the information technology industry, as well as many years of experience in organizational transformation. For the past 25 years, Mr. Yockey has specialized in helping tribal communities throughout the lower 48 and Alaska develop energy and broadband infrastructure and the organizational frameworks to support that development. In that context, he pioneered the first fully tribally owned and operated electric and wireless broadband utility companies in the U.S. over the years. Mr. Yockey has worked with over 70 different tribes in every region of the country on a wide variety of projects. This vast experience informs his work, which is dedicated to sustainable nation building through the combination of infrastructure development, capacity development, and sound financial organizational management. Mr. Yockey's educational background includes undergraduate degrees in philosophy and religious studies and graduate degrees in both cultural and environmental anthropology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. All right, Jim, go ahead and take it on over. And again, thank you so much for joining us today.
You bet. Well, good morning, everybody. I guess, again, this topic, today's topic is really around what I call unofficial tips for applying for DOE. The unofficial part is that I'm not part of DOE. I have been involved in the, from pretty much from the beginning when the tribal energy department began there with Lizana. I think it was at some of the very first Indian energy workshops that we got started. So I did, I've been involved in it for a while. Maybe the next slide, I did, I think I applied for in 2003 was the first successful grant I wrote under DOE. So it's been a while, and I've been to, I think, pretty much every one of those tribal energy program reviews, which started out with about a dozen people, and maybe 18 to 20, and now it's 300 or 400 people with really great representation throughout Indian country, and so it's turned out to be a really great program. I want to, thank Lizana and her staff and the folks that have been involved in that for a while. I know Mike Stevenson's there now, and a bunch of other folks that are really great. And I'm assuming they're giving talks during this conference as well. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to be talking about, and again, the latest solicitation is not out for DOE, so it's not like I'm going to be walking through how to apply to the current DOE solicitation. What I've got is really the tips and I guess the approach that I've done over the years, getting the grant, applying for the grant, and working through things. And so these are the topics I want to discuss. It's really around talking about feasibility, talking about EMDP, TEDC, some of the grant tools that I use. I want to talk through order of operations because I think that's important for folks that are just starting to look at applying for a DOE grant. And then talking about quality assurance, quality control of your grant, and finally submission. I think those are the main topics, but this is a topic that I don't think really is going to warrant a full hour's worth of discussion because, again, partly the new solicitation isn't out. So there's always something different and new in each solicitation. And because of that, I don't want to go too far down the line with respect to how you ought to apply for it. The other, piece of this is this whole grant has evolved. It's really moved on from, there used to be what was called a DOE first steps, second steps, and then an implementation grant is kind of the way that the program used to be set up. And so typically that first steps was oftentimes feasibility analysis. And that really it's almost all deployment dollars at this point. So let's take a look at it. Let's go on to the next slide. We can even start thinking about applying for DOE. You really need to do some amount of feasibility, and DOE requires it. It used to be, as I said, that you could apply for feasibility through the DOE grants, but those have pretty much disappeared. So you need to essentially figure out what it is you want to do, and from there, provide some ability analysis to see what it's going to work. I think there's the basic options on the federal level are these 3 grant programs through EMDP, which is EMDP and TEDC are both part of the Department of Energy and Mineral Development, DEMD, a bunch of alphabet soup. And I guess out of there as well was the NTBG, which was the broadband side of things that they just put out last year. But DEMD has great program for really developing feasibility, both at an organizational level, so organizational capacity, which is really what TEDC is about, as well as resource feasibility, which EMDP is about. So those 2 programs on the energy side are really an excellent way to get started to understand really the what it is you want to do, and essentially get some federal dollars to figure that out. USDA also has feasibility dollars in it. Tribes do not access USDA enough, in my view. It's a program with an awful lot of money at various levels, both for energy and other kinds of infrastructure. But it's there are feasibility grants available under USDA, and so you definitely want to look at that on the federal level as well. States can have some very good programs. Typically, those are federal dollars that went to the state, and then the state acts as a subrecipient, and they distribute them. And oftentimes, I said this yesterday, oftentimes there are tribal set-asides out of those state grants, and those tribal set-asides oftentimes are not used. They're not, there's oftentimes you don't see tribes applying at the state level. And it's partly because, as we all know, states and tribes have varying relationships. And so but don't neglect that if you're looking for feasibility dollars, because states typically do have dollars available. And then the other option is really self-funding, and I said this yesterday as well. I think it is good to put some skin in the game. If you're really interested in doing something, putting some of the tribe's own dollars into feasibility is a good idea. It just, obviously there's those CRF funds that came out, FRF funds, and there's enterprise dollars, and sometimes the feasibility study for energy is around one of the enterprises, like casino or gaming, reducing costs at some of the enterprises or at the administration level. So in this case, again, I think there's various sources available, and we can talk a little bit about those, and certainly open to any questions. I've definitely applied at multiple levels to all these different programs. So happy to answer any questions on that. Next slide, please. So the first thing you got to figure out is what it is you're trying to assess. What is the feasibility that you're trying to do? On the resource side, on the renewable side, there's solar, wind, there's biomass, there's hydro. Really, there's various other kinds of, gasification, pyrolytic gasification. There's been all sorts of things that you could assess. So what is it that you want to do? Do you want to, again, develop a resource? Do you want to develop an organization that's going to take care of that resource? My suggestion is when you look at this kind of thing, you look at it really both of those ways. The resource is one thing, but the way in which you develop that is really around the capacity and the organizational development of your own tribe. And so I really think that thinking about organizational development as a part and parcel of whatever it is you want to develop resource-wise is very important. So I think, figure out what is the resource you want and how do you want to go about it, but think about organizational capacity, because I think that that's key to really optimizing the resource. And so obviously, I've helped develop tribal utilities over the years, and typically by getting an organization in place, that allows you to and facilitates the development of solar, the development of wind, biomass, the development of those resources that you want to do, but you're doing it in the context of really boots on the ground and organizational entity that is in place. There's other ways that other things you might be wanting to assess. Indian country is just ripe for snake oil folks that show up with some latest and greatest invention that they think, because they can't get it out there in the market, they think that tribes will adopt it. And I've definitely seen expensive sculptures that end up as projects that never go anywhere on reservation lands and trust lands, partly because somebody came in, had a good idea, talked to somebody at the tribe, and then got something put in, got the tribe to put money in for it, and the next thing you know, you've got something that doesn't work. So a good chunk of the feasibility that you're going to do before you apply to a DOE grant is it commercially available? The gentleman, yesterday talking on storage made some really good points about commercial availability. You may, some manufacturing group or some inventor might come up with a one-off or something that they can build and can get it to work, but that doesn't mean it'll work at scale. It doesn't mean that it'll be commercially viable and that it's going to pencil out. And that was a really important point that was made yesterday. And I think that technological feasibility is doing that due diligence is certainly key before you jump into a given project, especially one that sounds too good to be true. I remember early on, this is, I think, 2005, somebody was talking about, yeah, we can project electricity, wirelessly. Well, electromagnetism, the radio spectrum is a wireless transmission of electricity, but the idea of really essentially trying to power something wirelessly is pretty funny. But that literally was a proposal that was in front of a tribe in 2005. So technological viability, commercial availability, all those are important. On the biomass side, for example, logistics are really key, and with wind as well. Wind turbines are huge. The rotors are 87 meters. You're talking about almost football field size, um, you know, really convoys to transport. And in small roads and small communities, it's difficult to get them there. Biomass, you have to figure out how to get typically uh, a feedstock that might be mostly water. You got to truck it somewhere and you got to get it from one point to another. So figuring out those logistics, those are all valid feasibility analyses that will help you figure out whether or not that particular resource is something that you could actually develop. And then finally, is it feasible financially? So all three of these are areas that I think you could dig into, and it's best if you've dug into all three with respect to any one of these resources. So thinking through those three areas is important, and I think that's the way to approach it before you start applying for DOE grants. That little point about utility rate of return. So tribal utilities operate because they recover their costs. And so if you're trying to do a tribal utility, you have to do an analysis that figures out whether or not what you're charging for it is going to recover your costs. And so utility rate of return it's a well-developed discipline. I don't know how many tribal utilities I've seen get started. Oftentimes they're water utilities, and nobody has any guess or reason of how they're going to basically provide return on their investment. Um, Oftentimes they're developing this infrastructure and then providing it for free. Well, the resource might be free, water might be free, uh, wind is free, solar is free, but maintenance, operations, all those things are not free. And so you have to figure out a way in which you're going to recover your costs. All of these are the components that go into feasibility analysis, and you got to do your homework on feasibility analysis before you get into the DOE grants. Okay, next slide. So tools of the trade, when I'm applying, I'm typically part of a team helping to develop or write a DOE grant. DOE grants are large, complex grants. They're not they're not a one pager. They're I don't know, hundreds of pages when you get everything in, depending on how big your engineering file is, depending on lots of things. It really is a complex endeavor, something you need to start really the minute it comes out as a solicitation, because typically there's going to be about a 90-day period before 90 days to maybe 6 months at the most in order to apply. But if you were doing this alone, you got started that 90 days, you'd have a hard time finishing it in the end of the 90 days. I have written these grants all by myself, and it it took all of that time. So it really is a very complex process. This RACI chart idea is really a way of organizing your team around this endeavor. And RACI just stands for who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who is informed about what's going on in the different pieces. And so identifying who on your team is fully responsible for one of the components, who is essentially accountable for it, who's going to be consulted about it, and who's going to be informed about it, just helps to organize essentially the way in which you're going to move through this grant. Now, the next slide is kind of a blow up of this RACI chart. And this for me is, I think, the most crucial thing that gets you in trouble if you don't follow it. And that's really, what is the order that you ought to start doing a DOE grant in? What's the order of operations? And as many of you know, getting a tribal resolution is and should be, the first order of operations. You've got to, oftentimes, depending on, and certainly during COVID, it was really crazy, but trying to get councils to meet, trying to get resolutions passed. You have to have some kind of a declaration of commitment or resolution. And so getting that started first is for me order of operation number one. Order of operation number two is getting started on your budget. Your budget is going to inform all the other pieces of the grant. The narrative, obviously, you got to write this, narrative and tell a story. You got 20 pages to do it in, but it's all going to be centered around how much are you asking for and why are you asking for it, and what do you have to support that. And DOE is going to come back at you and ask for how are you supporting your what it is that you're asking for. No doubt about it. So getting your budget stuff, getting that started right away is very important in terms of order of operations. Participant letters. Everybody, a good grant typically is going to have multiple participants. You're going to do a community win project. Okay, how are you going to involve the community? Is the community going to accept this? Are you going to be able to get that passed? So understanding and getting those letters of participation, sometimes you oftentimes have to deal with the incumbent utility. The incumbent utility is sometimes cooperative, and oftentimes you got to, drag them. And so because of that, you got to get started on the participant stuff relatively early in this process. And then really this is connected to the budget support, your budget justification workbook. And again, the caveat is this was last year's or the last solicitation for DOE that I've got organized here. It may not be how this thing comes out this next year. Under this next year, I'm told, certainly based on the budgetary information I have seen, there is going to be substantially more dollars available. And I'm not sure whether that's going to change the way in which this, the format or anything. But for now, and maybe I don't know, maybe Lizana or some of the folks from DOE are on the conference here, and they can chime in during the Q&A. But your budget justification workbook is a bear, and working through that is something you got to get going. Again, that budget support, meaning all those all the pieces that are going to form your budget. Having evidence of, well, yeah, we went out already for bid, or we've got indicative pricing on that particular item, and so we've got support from a company. Let's call it a solar company. They've given us indicative pricing for what it's going to take for this 1 megawatt project. So we're going to take that indicative pricing. That's going to be our budget support. We're going to put in, the cost per watt into our budget justification workbook and have that all documented. The template that's there it is what it is. I'm not going to say much about it because it's not my favorite spreadsheet. But in any case, you got to get at it, and you got to complete it. And finally is the technical volume, which is really your main narrative. This last one is 15-page limit. It really is telling the story. So you have to think about your project as a story. Think about how would you compellingly tell the story of what it is you want to do. It's called a technical volume, but it's really a narrative. You're trying to let the folks that are going to read this understand what it is you're doing, why it's going to work, what the obstacles are, how it's all going to come together. So that's your technical volume, and I think the way that I usually do that is I get started with that. I do my executive summary first, which is that, it's a one pager, but that one pager should tell you, if you do that one pager first, your executive summary, you kind of get an overall outline of your story, and that puts all the little pieces together that you're going to try to flush out in the narrative. So that would be my suggestion about how to get going on the technical volume before you start writing anything. Then they're going to require, again, those feasibility studies. So you have to have some documentation that you've looked at this before, that you understand some of the pitfalls, that you understand what's going on, technically, financially, um, resource wise. Those are all pieces that you're going to have filled in. So it's good to have teed that up via a TEDC grant or an EMDP grant or USDA grant or whatever other um, form you've done. So that's that, and then after that, you've got the site and resource maps and graphics files. Again, this stuff all gets added in. It's great when you're trying to tell a story to be able to point out, where things are on the map and what's going to connect to what and how. So that's what your graphics file is all about. Um, Showing essentially, if you have wind resource that you're trying to do, you take a look at the wind resource maps that you've had. Usually there's a feasibility analysis on that where you'll have a wind rose and you'll have your average, average wind speed and wind shear and all the other pieces that go into that. Similarly with solar, solar, it's, a lot less demanding. Everybody knows that, like solar in California, duh. You don't need some detailed resource map in order to convince DOE that it could work there. But other places, when it's biomass, yeah, you got to be able to tell a story of where the resource is, how you're going to get that resource out of where it is, and get it to your generation station. And so that's got to be part of what you're providing there. Design and engineering, again, sometimes this is something where you've put together a project that you want to do, but there's only been really very preliminary design on it. So it may be the case that you just don't have much, and you're going to do that all the engineering after the fact, or as part of a RFP process. But nevertheless, it's best if you've done at least some preliminary design as part of your overall feasibility analysis. So you should be able to pop that in there. This options analysis is something DOE started putting in. Again, I don't know how much more, but they basically just want folks to have shown that they've looked at more than one way of doing things. Oftentimes, vendors are approaching tribes saying you ought to do this, and because it's vendor driven, I think DOE has some skepticism sometimes about whether or not, well, that might be true, but there's a vendor that wants to sell you something, and that could be a good idea, but have you looked at this or that? And have you looked at wind? Had you looked at some other way of generating the electricity? If you haven't, they're gonna ding you on that. So they want you to have looked at different options, and those options you got to have shown that you've at least done some cursory things. Some things are self-evident, like I said. Solar in California, yes. Solar in Arizona, New Mexico, though, it's hard to say that it's not a feasible or an item there. The wind resource might not be there, so looking at wind, you didn't really look at it for very long because you kind of know. But in any case, we'll see what DOE does on this latest solicitation on the options analysis. I do think it's a good idea that there's, that there is some of that available, that you have to sort through. But we'll see. And then work plan, which is again something that used to be integrated into your overall. Um, Work plan used to be the main bulk of the narrative. Now it's totally separated out. It's kind of in its own format. I'm assuming that's going to stay the same, and it really is setting up your milestones and timelines and so forth. And it's a pretty modal thing because you have to just basically fill it out. So that's order of operations, and I think that's a good logical way to approach writing the grant. Next slide. Okay, so what I do is that I mirror DOE's structure. So DOE has a structure for all those different things that you just saw, all the different pieces that are part of the puzzle. And so I create a folder structure that basically looks exactly like that, so that each of the folders is populated with exactly what's going to be going and what's going to be uploaded to the DOE site. So it's funny, that seems logical, but a lot of people don't. They put it all into one folder, and then you're running around trying to look for it. So if you organize it so that you mirror the DOE structure in your folder structure, it's going to make it a lot easier when it's time to upload. You should, for each of those folders, there should be a checklist sitting on the side, and accountability. When you're working with a team, eh, it's a little bit of social engineering. You have to be able to make sure that people are accountable to get you the things that they say they're going to get you, and holding people accountable to that, both within your team, and then if you're doing this as a consultant helping a tribe, you got to you're going to be asking for information from administrative folks, planning folks, all those other folks to try to put things together. You gotta be able to have that accountability if you want to get this thing in. On the content side, for the narrative, it is kind of you're telling a story, but it is a check the box exercise as well. And that by that I mean, there are criteria, and you really look at that merit criteria in the solicitation, and the merit criteria is going to tell you what box you have to check. You just check every paragraph, make sure that you've checked off the pieces that are part of that. So all the reviewers are going to look for exactly that. Did you address this? Did you say something about this merit criteria? If you haven't, you're going to get dinged. And then finally, formatting, which is somewhat obvious, but there is a very specific margins and font, and they do matter. So DOE won't accept things that don't have proper font and aren't properly formatted. Spelling is just, I think it's an annoying thing. So if you just got to do the quality checks on that to make sure that that's all good. And then it's time to upload. Well, that upload submission is, everybody says it, nobody does it, but everybody says, yeah, you should. We're going to start this thing, a week before it's due, but it's, so many times it's that last minute when, the last day, everybody's trying to upload at the same time. And then you can't get it through. So again, my suggestion is upload early, make sure that you're ready, make sure that all your folders are set. You've gone through the quality checks before you upload. And I think, I'm not sure there's much left. What, next slide? Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, those are my tips for doing a successful DOE application. And I guess I'll just take questions. Like I said, there's not really a full hour of conversation here, or at least in terms of my input, but happy to answer any questions that people might have.
Thank you so much, Jim. Certainly appreciate you and the time that you took to do today's presentation and coming back. This was your second round. So thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. All right. Well, we do actually have a question in the chat box from a Vince Franco. He's inquiring, how did you find out about the DOE grant opportunities? Was it through www.grants.gov or some other online portal?
Yeah, it's typically the. I mean, so we actually have a web crawler, um, meaning we've got a little app that's going out and looking at grant looking for grant announcements. Typically, people do hear about it because it's announced through the Tribal Energy Program. It's announced through a bunch of different things. So a DOE solicitation typically comes out pretty early. And again, personally, we use a web crawler that is looking for different kinds of grants. But you can subscribe and take a look at grants.gov. I know that there's proprietary grant software, grant management software that looks both at solicitations and looks at all the other pieces that are part of that. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do it. Federal government makes announcements. The Federal Register is the official place to look. I don't know if there's anybody from DOE on the call, if there's any other ways in which people might become aware that it's available.
And for those of us that aren't so familiar what a web crawler is, can you expand on that?
Sure. Yeah, it's software looking for keywords. So there, you write a program that essentially is sitting monitoring web traffic, mostly governmental sites, looking for keywords, and then essentially that web crawler, brings back to us anything that is tied into keywords. You know, Indian energy, tribal energy, any of those kinds of keywords are going to bring up the is going to bring up the solicitation if there's one out there. So yeah, that's somewhat of a sophisticated way of figuring out whether or not you're getting all the information. You sometimes get overloaded with lots of things that you don't need, but you're kind of able to filter and figure out what it is you want to look at and apply for.
Fantastic. Thank you. Vince says, thank you, Jim. And he's asking another question. Is the order of operation the same thing as the work plan?
No, what I mean by order of operations is how to go after writing the grant. So you've got this big solicitation in front of you. It's got all these requirements. Um, all those requirements. Uh, what I'm saying is that for each of those requirements, it's good to establish what you do first. So you'll get this solicitation, and for example, there's all these forms that have to be filled out for non-lobbying and all these other federal things. Is that really something you do first? No, because you can get that done, probably in the last 5 minutes. So at least most of it, unless you need some kind of a signature. But getting your budget support letters, getting the quotes around the technology that you're going to try to deploy. You've got to reach out to people. You've got to get them to send you stuff. So you want to get that stuff started early. As I said before, tribal resolutions. It requires a tribal resolution. I put that up number one. If I'm working with the tribe, the first thing I'm going to do as soon as that DOE solicitation comes out, I'm going to send them a resolution template, and I'm going to say, if you guys are really interested in doing this, here's the resolution. We need this signed and passed. Sometimes the tribe will say, oh, we don't meet for another 2 months. Oh, we only meet quarterly. Well, within 3 months, quarterly, this thing's due. So do you want to do it or not? If you want to do it, we got to get a resolution. So you got to get those resolutions out front too. And some tribes are very nimble and can write resolutions, with a day's notice. They can get special meetings because they're relatively small. Other ones, it takes a long, long time to get a tribal resolution in front of them and get it passed. So I start that process number one, and then I go into the next thing, which is my budget support, and then the getting participants that are going to be part of that lined up, and then I get into that budget, the budget template. So yeah, maybe if I don't know, we could throw that slide back up there, but just to describe kind of what I'm saying there. Uh, I'm saying my preference for order of operations is what I was pointing out there versus what you get. You get this big application, it's got all these different files that you need to complete. I put them in this particular order. So see how there's a if you went through this content, like you've got a 5 and a 7 and an 18 on the right hand side, item numbers. So you got all these item numbers. Uh, that's not the order I put them in. Even though item 10 is applicant council resolution in the application, that's item number 10. I put it as my order of operations number 1. See what I'm saying? So these on the right hand side is showing kind of item numbers. When you get your solicitation, or when you get your application, you're going to see a bunch of different items in a particular order. I'm saying don't take that order, utilize my order, because in terms of actual timing, it makes a lot more sense to do these things in the order on the left hand side in terms of the priority number versus the item number. That might not have been clear from what I was saying before. The work plan is like item 5, as you can see. I do that, about 10th, because I have to get all these other pieces into place before I can really do my work plan. Hopefully that makes sense.
Fantastic. Vince says thank you.
Good.
All right. Into the
Oh,
chat
I
box.
think you lost. I didn't hear your mic fell off for a second there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just asking the participants if they have any other questions.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Is DOE on? I know that I saw that they were invited, but if DOE has anything they want to say other than something that they didn't like about what I said about DOE. But again, it's been a great program over the years, Tribal Energy Program, and the program review is just one of the best events I think any tribal member can attend, and great education of what folks are doing out there and how things are done, and it's really evolved. So it's just a great program, and Lozana and that group should be super proud of the work that they've done over the years.
Thank you. Philip Brown is asking, are you going to do a DOE grant training for the Learning Center? I'm not sure if that was for us or for you.
I don't know. How much are you going to pay me? No, I'm just kidding. Uh, I don't know. I haven't, I don't know. So the Learning Center is you're talking about for Seminole?
Us, yeah, our facility. Georgette Smith, our executive director, just mentioned. Thank you, Philip. That would be a great idea. We'll work on that.
So we are, I did write Seminoles, help them write their 2 DOE grants that they've got right now. So, and those were on developing, again, the microgrids that in Brighton and Big Cypress. So I did help, Seminole write those and put those together. So yeah, happy to do whatever you guys, happy to help.
Thank you. Um, and I believe Walter is asking, have you considered hydrokinetic energy marine tidal or riverine as a resource?
Absolutely. Um, I was involved early on in uh, kind of a wave generation um, startup that was looking to do it. Again, there's, to the degree that things are technically solved, I think that it's obviously an unlimited, awesome resource. whether it's tidal, on the Great Lakes, or wave action. Um, you know, the ocean has so much energy. Biofouling, all the different, it's a technically a very difficult problem to solve, and I know that there are some groups that have gotten to a point where it's getting commercially available. Um, I do think that it can be a great resource for any coastal communities, tribes of the Great Lakes. I think there is opportunity there, and feasibility of that is, again, you're going to ask those same questions. Okay, what's the resource? Okay, so I don't know. There's a power law associated with heights of waves, and the linear motion of waves can generate, I don't know, it's something like 10 kW per wave height. So wave energy is real. So now how do you get that to load? All those kinds of things, you got to do the feasibility analysis to make sure that you can do that. And I would be completely open to anybody that's trying it. And I know I looked at it years and years ago. It wasn't ready. It may be more ready now, and I know tidal energy is even more interesting in the sense that it's really, you can set these turbines up, and depending on how much tidal um, essentially lift there is, or drop, you're going to get falling water, and falling water is a super easy way to make energy. We've been doing it for years through hydroelectricity, for dams, and I think that wave energy and tidal energy is great. I haven't seen the fully commercially available stuff out there, but I know that a lot of people have been working on it, and I'm be super excited to see it actually done.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. All right. Well, if we have any other questions, go ahead and submit them in the chat box. Again, it's at the bottom of your screen. You should be able to just click it and type away. I'll give everyone just a moment. But while we're doing that, thank you, Jim. Again, we cannot thank you enough. We definitely appreciated you being here the last 2 days. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it. You guys did a great job, and again, I want to thank Chairman and everybody that was involved in this. You guys are very slick and well done for a virtual. It would have been better to have been in sunny Florida. I would have preferred rather than cold Wisconsin, but it is what it is. So
Next time, be on the lookout.
yep, yep.
All right. Well, there are no other questions in the chat box. Yes, we're going to go ahead and plug in contact information into the chat box for y'all. Again, thank you, Jim. And with that, I believe we're going to go on a brief break, just so that we can get our next presenters on board. And we should be back at exactly 11:15.
Welcome back, everybody. We are getting ready to start off our panel discussion of the morning on sustainable projects within tribal communities, focusing on an environmentally friendly powwow and tax credits for green housing projects. Our guest speakers today are Jacob Crane, the Executive Director for SLC Air Protectors, and Adam Rose, the Director of Partnerships and Growth for Travoy. Jacob Crane is a citizen of the, and please forgive me, Tsuut'ina Nation in Alberta, Canada. He is the Executive Director of the SLC Air Protectors, an Indigenous-led environmental-focused nonprofit organization dedicated to serving Indigenous people in the state of Utah. Jacob is also an Indigenous entrepreneur and enjoys building startup companies that positively impact Native communities. Like many, he wishes to see more conscious tribal investment for future generations that also creates platforms to build stronger, robust Indigenous economies. In 2021, Jacob was also part of the Renewing Indigenous Economies cohort with the Hoover Institute at Stanford University this past summer. Thank you, Jacob, for joining us. Now, Adam Rose joined Travoy in 2008 and has more than a decade's experience helping tribes and tribal housing authorities to develop affordable housing. Working with clients, tribal leadership, and community stakeholders, Adam listens and learns about needs, discusses and explores developmental possibilities, and once planning moves forward, he helps prepare and submit competitive low-income housing tax credit applications and other gap financing applications such as grants through affordable housing programs. Adam helps clients to win awards, to bring private investor funds and grants, to build new homes and rehabilitate existing homes to create decent, safe, and affordable housing for families in Native communities. So thank you, Adam, for joining us as well. And with that, we're going to pass it off to Jacob to start off this panel.
See you, Gus. Thank you so much for having me today. Coming at you from the traditional territory of the Navajo down here in southern Utah. I'm lucky enough to be married into the Navajo. My wife is half Navajo, half Persian, and super honored to be here, a part of this panel, and to talk a little bit about the making our gatherings environmentally friendly. Let's get right down to it. This was a topic that I got into and got more passionate about recently. We just finished hosting a powwow down in Moab. I don't know if anybody's been to Moab, but it was a wonderful turnout. Due to the pandemic, it was really hard to focus on making it environmentally friendly, just because of how we run our shows these days and how we run our gatherings. So that was a little bit challenging, but I know next year there's big plans to make it a little bit more impactful that way. Going right into the climate crisis that we're in, we've seen global sea levels rise since 2013, and I think just getting comfortable with having the conversation that we are in a climate crisis is one of the things that we're challenged right now as an organization. But as you know, Indian country today, I think a lot of times we have a hard time having this discussion. Partly one of the reasons why I think is just because of how our governments are structured. Some of us are heavily reliant on the fossil fuel industry, and so it can be a hard conversation to have with our tribal leaders and tribal community citizens. So that's something that I always say start with is having the conversation, and being okay with having that conversation, and being okay with having that conversation with our tribal leaders. And that's really where it starts. And you can go to the next slide, please. So how can we do our part? Going back to what I was saying, having the conversation with yourself that we are in a climate crisis. I know that there's a lot of pressures from a lot of current events. You know, we are living in a global pandemic. We are living in a climate crisis, and that can add outside pressures, especially to an already sensitive complexity within our tribal governments. Something that I've realized that the pandemic has kind of shown us is how fragile our existing systems are within Indian country. But you know, adding that climate crisis on top of that, it's kind of a headache. I call it the climate crisis headache that we're all living in secretly, but we don't ever really talk about it. There are some folks that are a little bit more further along, as we've seen in Canada. I'm traditionally from Canada. I'm from Tsuut'ina Nation. And there are 2,500 renewable energy projects north of the Medicine Line, but south of the Medicine Line, not as much, but we want to see more. And I think just opening up and having those conversations, and having that conversation within yourself, and what can I do to make tomorrow better? And it really starts with financial literacy on climate change, and there's tons of resources out there that are available. I know different organizations that are climate justice, climate action led are pumping out materials all the time to help educate our tribal citizens. Another organization that's really good, and I'm working with them right now, is Indigenous Climate Action. Indian Collective does some really good stuff. Seventh Generation Fund for Indigenous people, they do some really amazing stuff. Native Learning Center, the people that are hosting this gathering right now, They do a ton of things as well. So I think having conversations and holding spaces like this is probably the most effective way, besides implementing more environmentally friendly gatherings. That's I'm going to kind of get into. And I'm an ex-powwow dancer and singer. I haven't really been powwowing just because of the pandemic. So it's kind of changed the way, changed our lives and how we live, basically every single day. That's what the pandemic has done, but it's also kind of made it hard to gather. So I know we were planning on being in Florida and sunny beaches and face to face, but online has kind of served its purpose as well as keeping everybody safe. So, but I would definitely say educate yourself about climate change and how to fight it. Speak with your family and leadership about it. That's something that I kind of struggle with, is having conversations with my family regarding climate change, just because it doesn't seem like it's real because it's not here yet. But as we've seen sea levels rise over the past couple of years, and we see these shortages, and a large part of that is due to the pandemic, but also due to climate change within our food distribution. We see all types of things going on around the world. But have those conversations with your family, have those conversations with your leadership, have those conversations with your friends, and I think begin making those climate change goals within your house. Carpooling is one thing. I know my wife always gets mad at me about driving so far every day, but I think I have to do that for certain reasons because I work from home. So sometimes I'll stay in my house all day, and I'll realize I didn't leave the house at all today. So that's kind of my way of fighting climate change, is not driving as much and carpooling. And reducing your consumption, that's always a good thing. Something that I didn't really know until recently was how red meat is actually really bad for our planet. And I think that there's going to be a shift in the next couple of years to bring about that awareness. But I think having those conversations early on is never a bad thing. And then getting down to the whole nitty gritty of this conversation is practice making your events and gatherings eco-friendly. Having conversations with the coordinators, I think, would be really the first step, as far as getting the message across, and ensuring that there's biodegradable plates, forks, knives. That's one way you can do it, but also creating policy around the food vendors that are coming into these spaces. I think that's something that needs to be encouraged, needs to happen, and that can start with your leadership. You can go to the next slide, please. So starting again is starts with the leadership. So make a plan. First and foremost, make a plan. Talk to your leadership, get them on board. We have this thing where we elect our tribal leadership, and that's awesome because we get to sit down and have conversations with them, and we get to lobby them. And so that's something that I would encourage everybody to do, is just have that conversation. Next thing would be to encourage the leadership to have the conversation with the policymakers and see if they can start to implement those policies within, everyday gatherings, powwows, rodeos, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that would be really important, getting that to the next step. And again, existing projects, just transition, retrofit projects, and invest for the future. Getting everybody on board, making sure that the policymakers are communicating with leadership and policymakers are communicating to coordinators, people that are in charge of those projects or those places of transaction. And then again, support future projects with these initiatives. I think that would be really fantastic, is to have a policy laid out on how we're going to serve food, or how we're going to create, power or energy for these events. And something that I've heard again is, if you don't follow the rules and you get a tax put on your business, that's one way to do it. I think just not having them set up would be another thing. So just creating policy that says, hey, you have to serve this, you have to, follow this structure, you have to really break down the powwow to make sure that it's what's the word that I'm looking for? Where is it getting its energy from? What are they serving at the powwow? how are they getting to the powwow, and encourage everybody to really, what's the word that I'm looking for? Get rides. Everybody shares rides. Encourage public transportation. But one of the reasons why I kind of got a little bit more passionate about these powwows is because within my community, it was almost like a plane. Like right after the powwow, it would be like a plane just exploded, and there was just a ton of just trash everywhere. And people would go in and clean up and all that stuff. But I'm like, well, where's the trash going? How can we reduce that, and where's it coming from? And a large part of it was coming from it was all coming from the food vendors. And so that's when I kind of started to make a plan, like we need to target these food vendors and to create policy around these food vendors so that they can start, serving biodegradable, plates, cups, spoons, forks, knives, the things that we eat with, so that we can help reduce that footprint there. So that's kind of where I got that idea from. And it's just been a long process for me. Like many things, it can kind of take several years to kind of put these ideas together, but we were able to kind of create a space like that last year in the city of Moab. So it's been a long journey, but happy to get more folks on board with that. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So where should you start? I always say this, but start where you're comfortable. Have that conversation within yourself, but with your family members. The nice thing about YouTube and Google is that it's free 99, so you can really pull resources from almost anywhere. But I would say that there are a lot of Indigenous-led organizations that are pushing for climate literacy right now in the world, and I think it's really important that everybody takes a little bit time in their day to help educate themselves into making better decisions towards more environmentally friendly events, gatherings. Even if we host feasts, I think that's something that needs to be talked to a little bit about is, hosting a feast. What are you serving people with, and where's everything coming from, and how can we help do our part there? So there's just a lot of conversation starters that you can have, and it really just starts with where are you comfortable with, and where are you comfortable taking a stand, and finding resources is the next step that I would say. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So again, this is a nice picture of me. That's my regalia. That's my roach. And I was listening to this guy. His name's Isaac Murdoch. A few weeks ago, and he said that we used to live in a world where Indigenous people never had trash. We never had trash. Everything we had was on our backs, and we would move camp, and we would set up camp. And when that campsite would be, what's the word that I'm looking for, wear and tear on the camp, we would move camp so that we'd let that area, replenish and kind of regrow, and then we would move again, and then eventually we'd move back to that original camp. But there would be times where we would be moving a lot, but we would live in a way where there was no trash. And so it's kind of reintroducing that methodology of like practicing stewardship of the land, but also reducing what we're doing, our consumption on items and products. In today's society, all we get bombarded with is consumerism and capitalism, and just buy all the latest stuff. And it's having that conversation of taking the stand and ensuring that we're practicing that stewardship of the land, but we're figuring out a way to make that a little bit more visible. And I think the perfect way to practice that community engagement on sustainability and all that fun stuff is targeting our events, gatherings, even our ceremonies, ensuring that we're working with the land, and that we're taking care of the land long after our time here, so that we can make a better future for our children and the next generation. So events, gatherings, ceremonies, all that needs to kind of shift a little bit on how we're providing meals. Vendors are showing up, how we're powering the actual powwow. Like, where is that power coming from? Is it coming from solar energy? How we're lighting up the arena? Like, there's a ton of ways that we can kind of build those systems and go into a better future, working together with our tribal communities and making these events more sustainable. So you can go to the next slide, please. So again, there's hundreds of powwows every single year pre-COVID-19. Again, things have kind of shifted and things have changed a lot, but before the pandemic, there was always like 12 or 15 powwows going on throughout the year within Canada and the United States. And a large part of we see a lot of trash build up, and people come in and yeah, they may throw it away into the trash, but how do we make these events less like that? And one way to do that is to have bring your own dishes. I think people used to do that back in the day, or have a feast kit, bring that with you. Again, it's really hard to do that during the pandemic, so biodegradable is our next best friend. Even making recyclable bins more available on the grounds. I know we practiced that one year when I was helping out with the Tsuut'ina Nation annual celebration. That was something that we did many years ago, but I would like to see that more often, setting up recyclable bins, having the vendors serve biodegradable dishes and forks and knives. I know during the nighttime, we turn on these big lights and they kind of surround the gathering so that everybody can have lights to dance and whatnot. But where is that energy coming from? And where is the energy coming from? The sound, So it's just shifting our minds a little bit on getting that sustainability implemented. And I always say, you might even be able to host a workshop or two in the morning, or maybe during lunch break. Host a workshop about what you're doing at the powwow and how you're making it more environmentally friendly, and the coordinators, it's the coordinators' jobs to kind of help implement that and talk about that and how they're making our environments, our environments more safe and more environmentally safe for Mother Earth, and practicing that stewardship. So anyway, you can go to the next slide, please. So again, a simple gesture: speak with powwow coordinators, chairs on making this event more environmentally friendly, provide resources, and ask for help to make this next powwow safer for Mother Earth. These are all things that can be easily accomplished. It just starts with having a conversation, and sometimes you don't even have to go to leadership or even go to policy. But I always say start with leadership, and then it kind of sprinkles its way down. But you might even be able to just go ahead and have a conversation with the event coordinator, and how can we implement this, and how can we make this a better experience for everybody, including Mother Earth, because we are stewards of the land. And so I want to say thank you so much. I think that's the end of my presentation, and I believe I'm going to, there's one more slide. I totally forgot about that. Again, things you can do at your powwow. So this is something that I've learned over the years of my powwow career and journey, but making marketing and advertising materials online or word of mouth, that's like the strongest way of marketing, in my opinion. Encourage carpooling, online registration, and contest numbers to be made from recyclable paper. That's huge, just because like the amount of paper used for registration, tabulations, and numbers is a lot. That's a lot of paper. It's a lot of trees. Make sure that you have recyclable bins, compost, trash bins visible. Food vendor policy. This is a huge one. Biodegradable material, off discount for following rules. So just I would just say, this is where that environmental footprint tax comes into place. But again, that's what Adam's going to talk about. So I don't even want to get into there. He's going to talk about all kinds of stuff. Solar powered lights, again, night lights around the area, recycled drinking cups, use COP26 as an example. So at COP26, I went to COP26, the Conference of the Parties, 26th year in Glasgow, and they had like these environmentally made cups, and they were serving them everywhere, but it was so cool because they were all environmentally friendly. I thought that was really interesting. So I would just say, Google COP26 cups, and I'm pretty sure you'll find lots of examples there. Water stations, instead of like passing out the water bottles, that's something that we kind of see a lot of, is like a ton of water bottles, because we want to make sure everybody stays hydrated, right? Because everybody's dancing, everybody's moving, it can be hot, but having those water stations set up can really reduce that footprint there. Yeah, and just push to make your event or your ceremony environmentally friendly. Like, have that conversation beforehand. You're going to host a feast. Well, this is what we're going to serve people with. You're going to have the power. Well, these are the parameters or the rules and regulations around that. I think that's really important. Let's see here. Reduce entry fee if you can prove proof of public if you can provide proof of public transportation. That's something too, is like if you're taking a bus or a train down to the event and you can provide that ticket, let the person in for free. Like, encourage that. I think that should be something that should be encouraged right across the board. Feast bundles, renewable energy, and just transition comments throughout the weekend. It's always fun to have like the MC kind of announcing things, those messages, and having those workshops or whatever during the event. I think that's always nice, and maybe even talk about why we're doing this so that the message can get across to the greater community. So I believe that is the end of my presentation, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Adam. So thank you so much for listening to me, and I look forward to your Q&A part of the conversation.
Thank you, Jacob. Thanks so much. And I guess I just want to start with a quick thank you to the Native Learning Center for putting on this, great opportunity to continue to expand access to resources and ideas about clean energy specifically. The focus of my discussion today is really going to focus on how we pay for some of those things and some of those ideas that came up over the past couple of days. I think some of those are absolutely applicable to Jacob's conversation. The tool that we're going to focus on primarily is a tool called New Markets Tax Credits. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So as we're thinking about these different clean energy projects, that's just kind of one among many different things that tribes are trying to do, right? So there's a focus on clean energy, but that's alongside healthcare projects, that's alongside infrastructure projects, that's alongside schools and admin facilities that are also equally needed as well. And so this tool today is not specific necessarily to clean energy. It is absolutely viable and can be a great tool to keep in the toolbox when you're thinking about clean energy. But in addition to those types of projects, things like treatment facilities, schools, clinics, business investments, that's really where this resource can come into play. I want to spend some time today talking about this resource, in part because it's a resource that does not have to be paid back. So when we're talking about leveraging other people's capital, New Markets Tax Credits, alongside housing tax credits as another resource, definitely a viable tool that can help tribes leverage your own limited resources and use someone else's money in the process to do it. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Next slide, please. So I want to just start the discussion kind of thinking about a couple different things here. So number one, you might be in the throes of a clean energy project. So you might be trying to get, say, a utility scale solar project off the ground, or a wind project like we heard about the past couple days. The very first thing that you're going to be thinking about is, how do we go about funding that project? So this discussion today really focuses on a funding resource that can help provide a gap to help make that project possible, to make your clean energy project and get it off the ground. So, the other thing that, lots and lots of tribes are thinking about right now, how do we deploy and how do we leverage those ARP dollars that are coming to tribes, either on the housing side or through the infrastructure bill? Again, New Markets Tax Credits, absolutely a viable path to take a resource that you already have and leverage it into something more with funds that don't have to be paid back. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So to start with, we've helped facilitate a number of trainings through the Native Learning Center's platform. Again, just a tremendous resource providing good quality education, practical resources that can be applied on the ground. One of those that we use and help our clients use is a program called Low-Income Housing Tax Credits. So low-income housing tax credits, their value there is that, let's say you have a $10 million project, that resource can help pay for upwards of anywhere from 70 to 85% of a project's cost. So let's think a $10 million 20 unit project or 25 unit project. The housing tax credit program could cover as much as maybe $8.5 million of that project's cost with funds that don't have to be paid back. I'm not going to focus on that resource as much today. I know that we specifically provided a training through the Native Learning Center's platform, and that training is accessible online just within the past couple months that we did that training. So I point you to their website or our website at Travoy for more information about housing tax credits. The resource I want to focus on today is this one at the top, New Markets Tax Credits, MNTC. So not near as much financial benefit compared to the housing tax credit program, but still extremely, extremely valuable when we're talking about paying for upwards of 20 to 30% of a project's cost that doesn't have to be paid back. So again, that New Markets Tax Credit program, that's for things like clean energy. That's for things like admin facilities. It's for things like healthcare clinics. It's for things like new schools. Anything sort of in the community economic development arena is an appropriate fit for New Markets Tax Credits. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Next slide, please. So just to start, what I want to point out about New Markets Tax Credits to kind of keep in mind at a high level as we start this discussion is that tribes themselves don't apply directly for these New Markets Tax Credits. Instead, there are these entities across the country called CDEs, Community Development Entities. So Travoy is one of those. Native American Bank is a CDE. Citizen Potawatomi has their own CDE. So there are these entities dedicated under the New Markets Tax Credit program under the Treasury Department that are eligible to go after and apply for New Markets Tax Credits on an annual basis. In 2022, that allocation pool increased to $5 billion with a B. So there's about 200 of these CDEs all across the country. We as a CDE are responsible for applying to the Treasury Department. But from there, that's where tribes can benefit, partnering with a CDE that is responsible for deploying these New Markets Tax Credits directly into projects. Again, kind of starting the conversation high level, this cannot necessarily be a primary funding source that's going to fill 80% of the project cost, but it can be extremely, extremely valuable to fill maybe 20 to 30% of the last gap of the project to put the project into that range where it can get off the ground and become viable. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So again, CDEs, they're sort of the foundation for how this process of New Markets Tax Credits actually gets into projects. So CDEs, they're responsible under the code. They're this intermediary which applies for, seeks out, follows the Treasury requirements for applying for New Markets Tax Credits, and then are also directly responsible for deploying New Markets Tax Credits into projects. That's significantly different from the housing side. So on the housing tax credit side, the state agency, whether that's the Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority or whether that's the Washington State Housing Finance Commission, those are the entities that administer the housing tax credit program. New Markets Tax Credit is different in that Congress said we're going to defer that function to private entities. So these are not governmental, these are not state entities. Travoy is a business where we help tribes leverage this program that enabled us to become a CDE ourselves, a community development entity. So as a CDE, we apply directly to the Treasury Department, and then from there, we're responsible for deploying those funds at the project level. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So again, CDEs to start with, they operate across the country. There's probably more than 200 CDEs, but really the thing to think about and to keep in your mind when you're thinking about New Markets Tax Credits as a resource is that each CDE has its own specific mission and geography that they serve. So Travoy as a CDE, our mission is Indian country projects with the majority of our allocation going to what's called non-metro projects, so more rural tribal projects. Other CDEs have vastly different missions. So they might say, we only focus on the state of Washington, or we focus on projects that are rural manufacturing jobs in the Southwest region. So every CDE sort of has a mission and a project profile of the type of niche projects that they try to benefit with their allocation. So again, Travoy's allocation has been exclusively dedicated to rural Indian country projects, and more specifically, sort of in the healthcare, clean energy, community development, admin, school type space, or other tribal investments directly into business investments that tribes might be considering to diversify and strengthen their economies. Next slide, please. So again, this process kind of top to bottom, CDEs, community development entities, they apply directly to the Treasury Department. So earlier this year, just within the past 3 weeks, all of those applications were due to the Treasury Department. That sets in motion this extensive review and allocation process that in this case, this year, Treasury is saying that might take 6 to 9 months. They're saying that awards won't be made for 2022 new markets tax credits to CDEs until maybe the fall of this year. So, all of those applications are in. It's a one-time chance where CDEs apply for an allocation of new markets tax credits. To give you some sense of scale, Travoy's CDE has applied for $60 million worth of new markets tax credits from that $5 billion chunk that could be available. So all CDEs are just waiting now to find whether or not there are allocations made directly to their entity. Once entities receive new markets tax credits, whether that's Travoy, hopefully that's Travoy, in that mix of 200 different CDEs, again, it's the CDE's responsibility to deploy those new markets tax credits directly into projects. So at the project level, that's where we're looking for, pipeline of projects in Indian country, healthcare related, clean energy related, admin facilities, schools, clinics, treatment facilities, traditional medical facilities. That's where the types of projects where our allocation will be deployed later in 2022. And then like a lot of CDEs, when we don't have allocation ourselves, we also consult directly with tribes. Again, we work exclusively with tribes and tribal housing authorities, tribal entities to leverage this program. So we have the ability to go out and help find allocation, even if we do not have allocation of new markets tax credits ourselves. Next slide. I want to give you just a couple quick snapshots, recent snapshots of what other tribes have done just to get some ideas generated in what's possible. This is a treatment facility at Colville in Keller, Washington. So Keller is about 2.5 hours from Spokane. No really good quality treatment options available that were culturally appropriate. So the nation, in this case, the Colville tribe, took on the effort to develop this culturally appropriate treatment facility right there in Keller, Washington. And you can kind of get a sense of the benefit of a new markets tax credit leveraging deal. So here, about a $19.7 million project, about a $5.3 million equity benefit. That's the portion of the project that does not have to be paid back by utilizing this resource of new markets tax credits. Next slide, please. Another great example, exercise wellness facilities. They're great projects that absolutely can benefit from new markets tax credits. So $16 million project, about a $4.4 million net benefit to the Choctaw Nation in this example for their state-of-the-art wellness facility in Durant. Next slide. So just to give you a little greater sense, so again, on the housing tax credit side, we've been helping tribes in that capacity since 1995. We've helped on over 200 housing projects. That's raised over $800 million of equity on the housing tax credit side. That's investment directly into Indian country housing that doesn't have to be paid back. that work on the housing side enabled us to become a CDE to help tribes take advantage and leverage this program called New Markets Tax Credit. So that program, again, less subsidy per project, but you can see that the level of benefit that tribes have benefited from using this particular financing tool. So over $500 million worth of project cost, about 117 million of that has been proceeds from the New Markets Tax Credit program into Indian country housing, community and economic development projects that doesn't have to be paid back. Next slide, please. So what I want to emphasize here is that there is just a short list of things that you cannot do with New Markets Tax Credits. So you cannot do gaming directly. You can't do golf courses. You can't do farming with respect to using it to purchase agricultural land, but you can use it for processing and enhancing facilities and operations. So one of the projects that we did in Alaska was a fish processing plant. So lots of supply, lots of ability to catch the fish, limited ability to bring it to market and get it processed to create revenue from that commodity. So on that side of things, on the processing production side, absolutely eligible to use New Markets Tax Credits, but it can't be used just for straight agricultural farmland itself. The other key thing, and go ahead and go to the next slide, is that New Markets Tax Credits does have a eligibility by geography consideration. So this is just an example of the map that the Treasury puts out for areas that are eligible to use New Markets Tax Credits. You can see that it's on a census tract by census tract basis. So everything on this map is in green is eligible to use New Markets Tax Credits. Everything in white is not eligible to use New Markets Tax Credits. So that's something very easy that we can help you with. If you're talking about a project location, just reach out to us and we can help you determine right off the bat whether it qualifies automatically by geography to use New Markets Tax Credits. This is an extremely important one because we have numerous instances right now where projects are under consideration where literally one side of the street may qualify and the other side of the street may not. So if a tribe is looking at say a $50 million admin facility and thinking about how they could integrate in and benefit from New Markets Tax Credits, if they have the choice of locations and one side of the street doesn't really matter versus the other, it could have a huge financial impact on the ability to use New Markets Tax Credits automatically just based on geography. So that's a very easy one in the planning process that we can help say, yes, your location anywhere there on the reservation absolutely qualifies, or we have to be a little bit more strategic about, location considerations if it's a tool to be used. Next slide, please. And again, just reach out to us is probably the easiest way. This is the link specifically to that map where you can map your own geography, put in your address to see whether or not your geography automatically qualifies for New Markets Tax Credits. Next slide, please. Next one. So what I want to do is I want to spend a few minutes just talking about specifically what this might look like on, say, a $20 million hypothetical clean energy project. So in that clean energy project, it's going to start with, number one, a whole host and a whole stack of other capital as part of the project. So again, New Markets Tax Credits likely not going to be able to fill 100% of that project cost. It's going to be a resource to fill maybe around 20 to 30% of the project cost. So go ahead and go to the next slide. On this $20 million clean energy project, I want to focus first on the left side of the table here. So in this project, we're going to call the leverage funds everything sort of on the left side of the diagram, the $14.9 million. The leverage funds on a New Market Tax Credit deal are basically all of the other sources of capital that the tribe's able to pull together to make this project possible. So that could include tribal funds. It could include hard debt from a bank. It could include philanthropic funds. It could include, any other host of resources that might be on the table for making this community or economic development project possible. So that left side, again, that's the leverage loan side. That's really, really important because it's difficult to leverage new markets tax credits without a firm commitment for the majority of those resources on the left side, what would become the leverage funds. On the right-hand side, the transaction is going to start with $5.9 million of capital from a new markets tax credit investor. The CDE's fees, whether that's Travoy or Native American Bank or whoever it is, their fees get paid out of that equity portion that comes from the new markets tax credit investor. So that new markets tax credit partner, that's going to be someone like US Bank does lots of tribal projects. Capital One is another one that has invested significantly in tribal projects. Those, both the left and the right side, funnel into the investment fund specifically for the project, dedicated to the project that's happening on the ground, to combine to be what's called a QEI, a qualified equity investment. Those funnel through the CDE, Travoy New Markets, as an example in this case, down to what's called the Qualified Active Low Income Community Business. So in this case, that Qualic B, the QALICB acronym, that's the project level. That's the clean energy project. You know, maybe it's the $20 million wind farm. Maybe it's a solar project. Maybe it's a treatment facility. Maybe it's a healthcare facility. But ultimately, at the end of the day, that Qualic B, QALICB at the bottom of the diagram here is the business entity, the project that's benefiting from new markets tax credits. So the way that this benefit ultimately flows to the tribe is that the structure requires this loan on the right-hand side, and that loan is an interest-only loan, typically very, very low interest, so maybe 1% total, just as an example. In that scenario, that's a 7-year loan that is interest-only for the 7-year term. So on that $5.3 million loan, a tribe would pay that interest expense over the 7-year period, but the benefit comes when that loan is forgiven. So once that loan is forgiven after the 7-year period, the principal on that loan, the only thing that the tribe will have paid is that interest expense over the 7-year period. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Go to the next one. I think we'll explain this a little bit different. So again, a key consideration is that, I apologize, go back to the previous slide. So what ends up happening, again, is that this loan, after you take out the expenses, so we're going to focus, I know the screen's kind of small here, so we're going to focus on the bottom two lines. After that interest expense and the accounting and the legal expense is paid, on this particular transaction, a $20 million transaction, the tribe is going to have a net benefit upfront of about $5 million, $5.1 million. However, over that 7-year term, there's going to be ongoing compliance fees and that interest expense that's paid on that loan. So if you take that out, ultimately at the end of the day, the tribe is still able to benefit from $4.3 million of new markets tax credit equity proceeds that don't have to be paid back. So again, this really gives a good sense of the scale of the benefit it can provide. So a $20 million, again, clean energy project or a healthcare project or a school project, the financing structure is going to look exactly the same regardless of the project type. But the tribal benefit using new markets tax credits, again, focusing on these bottom two lines, really becomes that number at the very bottom, $4.3 million after the compliance period. So when you're thinking about, talking about whether or not this is a resource to bring to the table to talk with counsel or to maybe have another further discussion with your legal team about, hey, is this worth us exploring? We're not talking about a few $100,000 of benefit. We're talking about millions of dollars, upwards of 30% of a 10 or 15 or $20 million project that can benefit by leveraging and using new markets tax credits. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So again, I started the discussion about how it works for CDEs, community development entities, to apply to the Treasury Department. So that's not your job as a tribe. You don't have to worry about that. What your job is you have to, number one, find a CDE like Travoy that has a commitment and interest in investing in Indian country projects. So again, across our entire portfolio of projects, it's exclusively been for the benefit of Indian country, community and economic development projects, healthcare clinics, clean energy, that type of thing. So you, at your end, you might be a project manager or development director at your organization. Maybe it's the economic development entity, or maybe it's the utility department that's putting a clean energy project together. Your job is you're kind of moving the project forward. Maybe you're working with the architect on plans and specifications. You're doing due diligence on Alta survey. You're also most likely have a big role in the funding and the financing strategy for that project. So, maybe you're coordinating with the council and you're talking about ARPA investments being dedicated to your project. So you're also going to other funding sources and saying, hey, we're going to use a USDA loan guarantee program, and we're going to troubleshoot and figure out how that fits into the capital stack. So that's the point where your relationship becomes key with a CDE. So where you can really position yourself to use New Markets tax credits is finding a CDE that's interested in Indian country and working with them as they sort of learn about and hear about their allocation of New Markets tax credits, because the relationship here is critical. Your job is sort of communicating with the CDE what the status of your project is, helping it move forward kind of on those other funding sources. What's the left side of that diagram look like as far as the other capital stack? So as your project moves forward, you're sort of using your relationship with a CDE to position itself to be able to use New Markets tax credits when those awards are made later this year. So right now, Treasury Department is saying those allocations likely won't be made until fall of 2022. Well, there's lots of work that can be done in the meantime. So maybe that's, weekly or bi-weekly calls with Travoy to say, hey, here's where we're at. We anticipate going out to bid in the next month or so. We have a firm commitment from a bank lined up. We're working on another one. What about a BIA loan guarantee? Is that going to conflict? Well, again, this is where this relationship becomes so important. So in that instance, we can kind of help navigate and say, hey, the BIA loan guarantee, that is one of the only programs that we're aware of that potentially conflicts with New Markets tax credits. So use your relationship with your CDE. There typically isn't any fee associated with that from the CDE. They don't get paid until New Markets tax credits make it into your project. So use Travoy as a resource where we can help you navigate and say, hey, we understand this is a complex mechanism. What type of discussion and education do we need to have with the council to start with? Is that circle going to expand and include the tribal attorney and the economic development department as you're kind of looking at how this resource is structured and how it works? So use us as a resource and position yourself through that relationship to be able to take advantage of New Markets tax credits when they flow out to CDEs later this year. I just want to reiterate that really those leverage funds, that's one of the most important aspects that has to happen in order to be in a position to use New Markets tax credits. So it can't be the first set of funds in New Markets tax credits, but you're in an ideal position where maybe you have 60, 65, 70% of those funds committed on hand. Again, that's the position when you have those leverage funds fully committed that a CDE is going to be able to say, yeah, we want to do this deal. We want to do this New Markets tax credit investment. Regardless if it's Travoy or Native American Bank, that's going to be one of the first questions they ask. What's the status of the other funding sources, and how do those line up in the project profile capital stack? Next slide, please. So again, communication with your CDE. Use us as a resource for education. This is something we do every single day, talking with council, talking with your economic development board, talking with your attorneys to make sure everyone understands how this structure can work and what has to happen in order to benefit from the new markets tax credits at the end of the day. Next slide, please. So one of the questions that always comes up, what's sort of a minimum size that's ideal to use new markets tax credits? Well, unfortunately, the reality is that because of the transaction cost, this is not really a program that's appropriate for something like, say, $1 million smaller community project. Typically, this is going to be a much bigger investment, maybe in the $5 million range as a minimum. So typically, we would tell our clients, sort of 5 to 12 to 15 million is sort of ideal for leveraging new markets tax credits. So again, you can anticipate around a 20 to 30% net benefit using new markets tax credits on a $10 million clean energy project, roughly $2.5 million benefit on a $10 million project. Again, the timeline is less important for you as an entity trying to use new markets tax credits. That firm deadline to the Treasury Department, that's passed now. We've already submitted our application. So really for tribes and tribal entities, it's navigating that relationship and keeping in contact with an entity, a CDE, that has strong interest in investing in your project once those allocations of new markets tax credits are made. The other question there, what about combining efforts? Yes, this is one of the cool things about new markets tax credits is that you could actually have multiple different projects, even in different geographies. Maybe it's, you have multiple different healthcare clinics at the Choctaw Nation, and those are 100 miles apart, but they're all happening on the same timeline. You can roll those projects into the same new markets tax credit transaction and benefit from that overall economies of scale of different projects combined into a single transaction as well. Go ahead and go to the next slide. The next one. So again, what I want to do just to kind of wrap up is just talk about a few more examples, because I think it really provides some good context for what other tribes are doing. And remind me, is the Q&A within the last 5 minutes here, or is that in addition to the 6 minutes of time that we have remaining?
Hello. Yes, the Q&A is going to be around the last 5 minutes, and it's going to be with Jacob as well.
Perfect. So then let me just go through a couple quick examples, and then we'll dive right into Q&A. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So assisted living, once you get into, licensed healthcare component, absolutely eligible to use new markets tax credits. So not necessarily the right tool for like independent elder housing, that would be the housing tax credit, but once it has a licensed healthcare component, absolutely eligible. Next one. And go ahead and you can kind of flip through these kind of quick to wrap it up here. And I'll just kind of talk about a couple of these as you flip through here. So medical facilities, this is an example at La Vie des Arts in Michigan, kind of world-class, state-of-the-art medical facility, community facility, about $13.5 million project, about $3 million equity benefit. This is a great example at Coeur d'Alene, so a health and wellness facility, but really the key here was kind of wraparound services provided to the kids at this awesome wellness facility at Coeur d'Alene in Idaho. Next one. So again, about a $20 million project, about a $6.4 million net benefit from new markets tax credit proceeds. That same treatment facility that we looked at previously. So Colville has also done their admin facility use new markets tax credits, a very large $44 million kind of state-of-the-art admin facility. Any of those types of projects are great candidates to be able to use new markets tax credits. I'm going to stop there because I know that we want to get to the Q&A as well and bring Jacob back in. Happy to flip through a few more examples, but I'm going to defer back to Cora and see if now is the time for the Q&A.
Yes, yes, it is. And for our participants, if you're interested in the other projects, you do have the full presentation in your participant handbook. So we do have a couple of questions here. And so I'm going to start off with the very first one for Jacob. And it says, where can I find educational resources to help educate myself on climate crisis?
Yeah, great question. There's a ton of resources on the web. YouTube has a ton of resources. If you're looking for more Indigenous-led content, Indigenous climate action of things, Indian Collective has some things as well. Yeah, those are 2 places that I would start, or 3 places that I would start.
Awesome. And so my next question is for Adam. And it says, Travoy is a community development entity, correct? Where does Travoy fit in all of this with new market tax credits and whatnot?
Yep. So again, our application is pending with the Treasury Department. We've requested $60 million this year, and if we're successful getting that award of credits, 100% of that will be deployed into Indian country economic development projects. So more specifically, clean energy, healthcare projects this year is sort of our focus, in community facilities with our allocation if we're successful.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that. Jacob, the next question is for you. And it says, how do I go about having these type of conversations with my family, friends, so that I don't lose their attention?
Just meet them where they are. I think that's the most important thing. Sometimes people can be a little bit standoff, and there's a lot going on in the world today as we woke up to some news. But just meeting folks where they are, and getting more comfortable with having those conversations and trying to set those family goals, friendship goals, and how to be better.
Thank you so much for that. Adam, could these new market tax credits be used for something other than clean energy?
Absolutely. Yep. So all of those examples we talked about, but in addition, also think about it in the context of infrastructure. So maybe you're doing a $5 million clean energy solar project, but maybe there's another, $3 million of infrastructure on that same site that's going to really be the linchpin for a big business incubator project. Absolutely, those could be rolled together into the same transaction. It could be for infrastructure on its own as well. So think creatively about what you have going on. It could be clean energy, but what else do you have going on that could be rolled into the same transaction?
Great. And one more question for you, Adam. It says, what advice do you have for groups trying to leverage new market tax credits as a funding resource?
Yeah, I think what's critical is that relationship component with your CDE. So Travoy, we're not the only CDE out there. Our mission and our commitment has always been for Indian country economic development projects. That's the same in 2022, and that will be our mission forever. So we believe that we can help navigate and be a resource to get that resource into projects specifically. But really, it comes down to that relationship. Like, stay in communication with us, use us as an education resource, help you as needed, communicate with your council, with your legal team, your economic development team, because really it's positioning yourself through that relationship and helping us understand where your project's at so it can use new markets tax credits at the end of the day.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. And last but definitely not least, Jacob, we do have one more question for you. And it says, there are so many events happening within my community that could start making that transition into being a little bit more green. Who do you suggest they speak to?
I would suggest they speak to the event coordinator, or the event planner. Just have a conversation with them, and it really just could be a cup of coffee. Let's go get lunch together, or maybe have a quick phone call and just have that conversation. Be like, hey, what are we doing to make sure that this is a little bit more environmentally friendly?
Thank you so much. So that brings us to the end of this panel discussion. Thank you, Jacob, and thank you, Adam, for your time. And so I'm going to pass it off to Crystal. She's going to introduce our closing keynote.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I hope all of you enjoyed that last session. We are very excited to get into the keynote presentation. So, with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our keynote speaker. On behalf of the Seminole Tribe of Florida, we are honored to present to you our closing keynote speaker, Willia Johns. Ms. Johns is the Director of the U.S. Department of Energy, DOE Office of Indian Energy, Policy and Programs. She's responsible for upholding and advancing the Office of Indian Energy's mission to maximize the development and deployment of energy solutions for the benefit of American Indians and Alaskan Natives. Ms. Johns is a member of the Navajo Diné tribe. It comes from northeastern Arizona. Her background is in the renewable energy and community organizing, having co-founded Native Renewables, a nonprofit that builds renewable energy tribal capacity while addressing energy access. Her work with the Black Mesa Water Coalition and Navajo Green Economy Coalition has led to groundbreaking legislative victories for groundwater protection, green jobs, and environmental justice. In 2019, she was awarded the Nathan Cummings Foundation Fellowship. Willia Johns is deeply honored to work with the Office of Indian Energy to help communities lead the way in the transition to clean energy. Ladies and gentlemen, Willia Johns, welcome.
Thank you, Crystal, and thank you all for inviting me today to present on behalf of Department of Energy and the Office of Indian Energy. Really proud of our team. I think our own Tommy Jones opened up the session at this conference, and just want to say appreciate the invitation and participation of the Office of Indian Energy, and also the partnership that we've been building with the Seminole Tribe of Florida and all tribal entities and tribal nations that are pursuing their development of their energy resources, and also for the energy vision that you are all bringing to this conference. And I went through the agenda and I sat in some of the sessions earlier today. And just really grateful for the organization that went behind this conference. And as someone who has done a lot of organizing in community, but also in my own tribal nation and outside our tribal nation on renewable energy development from more at small scale, and then also in dialogue with the kind of large scale projects as they are being developed on tribal lands. There's huge opportunity, and I just want to say that this conference is serving a lot of the, I guess, the complementing the vision and the needs and the learning that is really important in how you continue to build within communities and leave something good behind for our future generations. I am, as Crystal mentioned, I'm Diné, I'm Navajo from northeastern Arizona. I'm Salt Clan, born for the Red Bottom people, and I have been working in energy for about, I don't know, over 20 years. Actually, I got started and really became active in my community. I live 2 miles from a large coal strip mine, and started to learn quickly about the impacts, the agreements, the energy agreements have had on our community and our nation, and really understanding the environmental impacts, but also the social impacts within our communities in a 50-year time frame of an industry in our backyard. And I also learned a lot about, the need to really come together with community and think through, what do we want for our future? If this, coal mine does close in the future, what are we going to be looking for, and what are the needs, and trying to do that assessment. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of people in my community, including my family, that don't have access to electricity, transmission lines, don't have access to running water, and also our roads are really unpaved, and lack of communication around, broadband infrastructure. So I do feel for these areas in the U.S. where access to basic infrastructure is really challenging. And for me and my family, my community, I've always been more of a, trying to figure out how do we make and improve the lives of our clanship and our nation. And that's sort of the same teachings that I bring here to DOE in this role. I've been in this role for 1 year, and I have learned so much about government and our obligation to tribes like yours in the way that we communicate, the way that we engage, and the trust responsibility that we hold as federal agencies and the federal government to tribal nations, and upholding also treaty rights and responsibilities that we have. And so this is all great learning, and that I am it's been such a pleasure, and just wanted to recognize that in this role, as we are embarking on this amazing opportunity in implementing the bipartisan infrastructure bill, lots of opportunities for Indian country and pursuing their clean energy vision. And in regards to transmission, in regards to looking at EV and looking at infrastructure that is needed in Indian country. And within DOE, we have $62 billion that we're actually working and designing how to implement that $62 billion and get it out the door. And for my role in our office, we've been looking at this bipartisan infrastructure law and how it's going to complement and support tribes. And along with all of the existing work that we do, we have a financial assistance program, a technical assistance program, and an education and outreach program within the Office of Indian Energy. I'm sure Tommy Jones went through who we are as Office of Indian Energy, but we have 3 duty stationed offices, one in Anchorage, Alaska, one in Golden, Colorado, and here in headquarters in Washington, D.C. And as you can see, we are still in maximum telework due to COVID-19. And, it's been wonderful still working from home and being able to do this work in a, we can still continue. And so appreciate the option for virtual sessions through this conference, and for me to be able to participate in this way. So our office has been supporting, many tribal entities and nations in pursuing their clean energy vision. And I'm really proud of the 10 years that Office of Indian Energy has been doing deployment work, getting hardware in the ground. And it's a proven model where, yes, there is a lift in preparing to submit a proposal, a grant proposal, whether it's through our office or other offices or other departments and programs throughout the federal agency. All of that pre-development work is, so important, and in doing research and doing your homework in the way that you put together a proposal to be able to get submitted. And for our office and throughout the federal agencies, we are identifying some of these gaps. And so some areas that I love about this administration is it's committed to equity and environmental justice. And I'm not sure if you all have heard that there's this initiative called the Justice 40 Initiative, where all of the clean energy investments need to benefit disadvantaged communities. And I think it's 40% of clean energy investments need to show benefits in disadvantaged communities. And for a lot of tribes, this is inclusive of tribes. And so I do see, within the bipartisan infrastructure law, there are lots of opportunities for tribes to apply and, geared towards our tribal communities to be able to have access to funding, technical assistance, and the support that they need. And so this is the area that we've been just solely like really focused on and doing better. The other piece that I'm excited about is just the upholding our trust responsibility to tribes and strengthening our nation-to-nation relationships with tribal nations. We have 574 federally recognized tribes throughout the United States and Alaska Native villages and corporations. And, we have been working at also how do we strengthen that? What does that look like? And so we have our own policy in the way that we work with tribes and the way that we engage, and all of the input we've been receiving from tribal nations since our first consultation last year in April has been, all that input is being put into a document that will give recommendations on how we can be doing better. And now that the bipartisan infrastructure law is here, we are applying some of those principles and recommendations so that we are doing good outreach and engagement, and that you all are receiving the information ahead of time and providing input. And so this is really, I think, a monumental time that we're living in. And I know there's news that happened last night and today, and I just want to say that, we all have to continue to be grounded in who we are as Indigenous people and the commitment we have to our communities and our cultural ways. And that's been one area that I feel like our goal and priority and value system that I come from is, our Indigenous values that guide us every day, that guide us every season, that guide us into the future. I love going, talking to my family and thinking, hey, like, how are things going to be 50 years, 100 years, into the future from now? What do we need to consider for our future generations so that they can sustain the precious elements of water, of land, of language, of the things that keep us who we are as with our identity, and those type of value systems. You're really trying to uplift that here, because I do think we are in this place, in this opportunity to heal our Mother Earth, to heal our communities. We have seen, over 500 years of, here in Native America drastically change, and now we have climate change. And I think with our teachings, we can help, heal our climate. We can help heal these issues that we are seeing locally, globally, and we carry that wisdom. So that's been my stress to you. I can't stress that more, is that you all keep doing what you're doing, and continue to plan. I mean, I'm really excited about the outcomes of the projects that you all have been planning and also putting in the ground, and then the benefits, long-term benefits of the use of renewable energy. It works. Solar works, wind works, and I've seen it happen. And that's why I'm a huge supporter of renewable energy. And I think that it's really powerful in that we use these natural elements to power our homes and add that to that self-determination and self-reliance, and that we are all hoping to achieve. So I'm not sure where I'm at on time. I think I have 45 minutes, right? I feel like I've been talking for a long time. Oh, wow. Amazing. I'm like, did I just talk 30 minutes? Well, I think that in addition to the work that I just went over my, the values piece and everything that, let me look at my notes. Hang on a second. I wish I could put slides up. I didn't get my slides in on time, but one area that I would love to announce is that if you go to the whitehouse.gov /build, there's the bipartisan infrastructure law toolkit there. And this goes through all of the provisions within we call it bill for short, on roads, infrastructure, power, water, and this is just a good toolkit to have. Department of Energy is coming up with our fact sheet for on energy, so that we're going to be able to get that to you soon. The other piece is that we're going to be hosting a tribal consultation session on March 29th. And I think today or tomorrow we get the letters out soon. So we're meeting that, giving tribes enough time to prepare. But this is something that I wanted to give you all a heads up. And then also we're part of the White House Council on Native American Affairs. And within the next couple of weeks, they are going to be hosting a tribal listening session on sacred sites. It's an interagency memorandum of understanding on how a commitment of agencies protecting sacred sites. Let me see, hang on a second. Guess those are the two important announcements that I wanted to make. And again, the bipartisan infrastructure law holds a lot of potential, and we at DOE are excited about how tribes can have more opportunity to apply for funding, and we want to make sure that we are also receiving input from your tribal leaders and guidance, from tribal staff around how we do this. And so that's something I really wanted to make sure that I get out there. I think that's all I have. I mean, I think I'm also really excited about hearing more in your dialogue in the past 2 to 3 days. The questions you may have around energy project and development. We do have a loan programs office with the Tribal Energy Loan Guarantee Program, and we work closely with them, and we have hosted a funding, I think a roundtable discussion on funding challenges for tribes last May, and have been compiling all of the answers and responses, and I think we're going to be posting that on our website soon. On our DOE Indian Energy website, there is a lot of tools there. There are videos, there are presentations we host monthly webinars, and then also just we have a newsletter that reaches over 24,000 people. And so you can sign up on our website, and we can put you on that listserv, and we will also notify you of all of the upcoming opportunities, events. The other thing is that we do have a, gosh, I just blanked, website, newsletter. Yeah, I think that's, the Clean Energy Corps. So DOE announced the Clean Energy Corps, which is going to hire 1,000 new DOE employees to hire. So it's exciting. This is to implement and stand up 60 new programs within DOE through the bipartisan infrastructure law. And these are huge opportunities for everybody. And I want to make sure that you all are aware. It's on our website. Please apply. And, we have been encouraging, everyone to apply, and definitely our tribal constituents, to let them know that this is an opportunity for everybody. So, and again, the administration is really wanting to help diversify our workforce. I think DOE tribal workforce is like, 1%. And definitely we need more of you. And so please let me know if there are any questions regarding that, or get in touch with our office. Happy to send more information on that. And I would love to ask you all questions, even with this bipartisan infrastructure law. What is it that you need? What could be some ways that we can support? Is it more webinars? Is it, what type of engagement seems would be helpful for you all in preparing for this, to write for, to prepare yourselves, I guess. And I think that's been one area that we have been wanting to, or eager to know. And I'm sure there's lots of suggestions on what that looks like. And again, I'm just really honored to be in this role and continue to, really stand up for Indian country, because I think coming from a nonprofit, entity, funding opportunities were really challenging, especially for rural, remote regions of Indian country, or areas that where we don't have engineers on hand, or private investment on hand, or other entities, and really just trying to pull together a proposal. And I just remember doing this with limited resources, and how it can be very challenging. So I'm sensitive to that, and I understand that. And but I guess I just want to make sure that that you all are empowered to be able to have the tools and can put in proposals, and it's very exciting. So the administration is really wanting to address this climate crisis, and equity is a huge center around this, and I do see that's the opportunity for tribes in all of this. So I think I still have like 20 minutes left. Wow. I don't know if I'm talking faster, but I feel like I'm talking a lot.
No, it's all good. Thank you, Aaliyah. We definitely appreciate your words, and I love that you mentioned, we want more natives out there working within this community. So absolutely, thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, with that, again, thank you so much for being our closing keynote speaker. It is such an honor to have you here, and we just appreciate your support so very much.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah. Are
Go
there
ahead.
any questions?
I'm not. Folks, if you have any questions, go ahead and throw them into the chat box, and we'll give them just a second. Oh, yes, we do. All right. Okay. So, Adam Ospikoff, question: is there a way to simplify the process? Create a process similar to NEPA, SEPA, check the boxes to initiate and process projects?
Is there is there a easier way on, sorry, repeat that one more time.
No, it's okay. Is there a way to simplify the process? Essentially create a process similar to NEPA or SEPA, and check boxes to initiate and process projects?
That's a great question. And, I honestly, I think when it comes to the grant process, it's pretty straightforward. And in general, I'm not, when it comes to NEPA, there are definitely coordination that needs to happen between Department of Energy and Department of Interior around, if we are wanting to see Indian country take advantage of and grow renewable energy potential, that's, there needs to be coordination, collaboration, and I'm already seeing a lot of that within the White House Council on Native American Affairs. So, I mean, we know there are the challenges, and so we are working on it and hope to have, but that's a great comment. We hope to have some, come to some recommendations that where it gives tribes priority and benefits to be able to get projects done.
Fantastic. Thank you. Oh, and he says thank you as well. So wonderful. All right. Do we have any other questions? This would certainly be the time. We have a bit of time to go ahead and, roll through this. We'll give everyone just a moment.
Yeah, and I just wanted to also, I forgot to talk about a couple things. So if we do get our budget passed, we are going to be focused on energy access and energy transition. So these two areas are pretty broad. As you know, we have the highest amount of Native American homes that don't have access to electricity today. And we are doing a congressional report on energy access and reliability right now. And hopefully that will be done by the summer. And we held a listening session last fall around that. And this is important because what I'm learning is the need for in rural and remote communities and tribal communities, it is hard to find energy data. And that's been one area that we've been, well, for me, just learning that there needs to be more information that, that is intentional around capturing, the challenges that tribes are dealing with when it comes to energy burden, and we also call it energy poverty. When families are struggling just to buy enough fuel to chart or to power their generators, and it can be a heavy cost with folks that have limited incomes. So this is one area that I feel like Department of Energy can take on, is to address energy access in tribal communities and rural areas. The other one is energy transition. As you know, there's coal plants, coal mines that have been shutting down in the past 5 years throughout the U.S. and wanting to support tribes in that transition, and then also tribes that are like Seminole that are already on their way in transitioning, in using renewable energy. And so it's not necessarily, the transitional or the energy transition of tribes from like fossil to renewables. It's going to be applicable to everybody, including tribal colleges and universities, that they go 100% renewable energy. And this 100%, to clean energy, renewable energy is so, powerful, the vision that President Biden has to get to, to net zero by 2050 and 100% clean energy by 2035. These policies and that vision, for Indian country, I think there are tribes that are also going already that have been the leaders in that. And I do see tribes leading the way because it's in such line with who we are in our traditional values as people. So I think that this is going to be complementary. And we're excited about this because it's, it doesn't, the energy transition is already what we've been doing as an office with our financial assistance or FOAs that we've put out. We also offer technical assistance at no charge to tribes, and so it has to be at the tribal leader or tribe's request. And I guess the other piece, around these projects, we really, encourage, the building capacity of, tribal energy managers and utilities to take that lead. And I do think there is, we have our peer-to-peer review in the winter, and that's where I learn a lot about projects and where I hear, the successes and the outcomes of projects that have been implemented, and that sharing of knowledge and lessons learned, but also like for me, that I see that them all as like have been leading the way, and any way that we can continue to push for policies that promote, Indian country to take that lead, we're going to keep doing that. And that includes, the larger scale, projects that I think that are, the loan program office at DOE is wanting to continue to support that, there is tribal projects throughout, Indian country being developed. So, and then there are different models that are needed. So, yeah, I'm really eager to make sure that we are also working with the, private public sector of these projects. And there's a lot of philanthropy out there that are also, offering, suggestions and resources to tribes because of this Justice 40 initiative. And so want to make sure that, all of this gets to you all, and that you all feel empowered to apply for grant opportunities through DOE. And also just want to make sure that you all are aware that we'll have, any questions you have, we can respond and help you. And I know DOE's working on figuring out how to make sure that there is somebody here that it's going to respond to some of the questions regarding bill. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Okay, we actually do have another question from Juan Gonzalez. The question is, the Department of Energy has some international cooperation offices. Does your office work on international cooperation with other indigenous groups in North America, Canada?
Not that I know of. I mean, I have to look at it. I think there's a agreement with, I forgot their acronym, but it's with Canada, and working with First Nations people there and how they're pursuing their clean energy projects and vision. But for IE, we have not been in any, well, not that I know of, have been engaged internationally yet.
Thank you. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, thank you again so much, Walia. We appreciate you being here and taking the time to be our closing keynote presenter. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You all have a good day.
You as well. All right. And with that, we are going to roll into our closing video from our chairman, Marcellus Osceola Jr. So please enjoy, and Cora will go ahead and close out.
I'd like to thank Walia Johns for providing the keynote address for this year's Energy Conference. I'd also like to thank everyone who attended this year despite the many challenges we faced. Although we had to do everything virtually and without the opportunity to talk to each other or even enjoy the tribal fair that usually happens this time of the year, we look forward to the day when all these things will return. However, we cannot sit and wait around for things. We have to go and gain knowledge to provide more for our fellow tribal members. This has always been the focus of this conference, to share with other tribes success stories regarding new and emerging technologies. We no longer wait for the outside world to bring this knowledge to us. We are sharing with each other. I'd like to thank Georgette Smith and the Native Learning Center for their hard work on the Energy Conference. I'd also like to thank the many speakers and presenters for sharing their stories with all of us. Thank you all from the Seminole Tribe of Florida. It has been a pleasure, and we look forward to bringing you an even better conference next year. Shinabish.
As we come to a close of the Seminole Tribe of Florida's Chairman's 4th Annual Renewable Energy and Sustainability Conference, we would like to extend our appreciation to Chairman Marcelo Sociola Jr. for envisioning this conference, to the speakers and panelists for their valuable contributions and their commitment to the growth of energy resilience within Indian country. We also want to thank the members of the STOF Energy Committee, STOF IT Department, and Seminole Media Productions in collaboration with David Sedell for their hard work and dedication to this conference, and to all the participants who attended the conference and helped make it such a successful event. Lastly, please let us know your thoughts through our survey, which you can access in the chat. We value your feedback greatly. Thank you.
Same old song, just a drop of water in an endless sea. All we do crumbles to the ground.